Hello, everyone, and welcome back to yet another edition of the Why Didn't You Test That podcast. Rich Jordan here again, resident pod host. Again, joining me, he's getting familiar with this. We have James Walker. Say hello, James.
Yeah, hi everyone. Just can't stop coming back.
And our very special guest on the pod today is Anand Bagmar. So Anand is a software quality evangelist with 25 years in the software testing field. He is passionate about shipping quality products and specializes in product quality strategy and execution. He builds automated testing tools, infrastructure, and framework. Anand is a contributor to the Selenium project, writes testing related blogs, and has built open source tools related to software testing. A very warm welcome to the pod, Anand. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me here.
Awesome, it's a pleasure. Um,
And thanks for making me feel old. 25 years, huh?
I was going to say that's slightly more than me. It's just compounds the making you feel old. Hey, at least you've got hair. So let's get the conversation going. So, for people not familiar with yourself, Anne, give us a bit of background to yourself. How did you wind up in testing? How did you find yourself here today?
Wow. That's a long story. I think we are going to take the full hour for this. You started with the wrong question. Sorry. But I'll try to keep it short, right? I started in the testing field not by choice. I was aspiring to become a developer. I was in the US, finished my master's. I got a development role at Motorola, but I wanted to be away from Chicago, the windy city. So I chose California as my greener pastures, but I didn't get a developer role immediately to start off. So I took the first role that came along my way, which was as a tester. And that too, it was more on performance testing and doing IVR testing for that matter. Very interesting. And that actually got me hooked into testing. I said, oh, that's interesting. I don't want to really go back to development yet.
Mm.
And then after a year or so, that was a big recession in the US and worldwide for that matter. Uh, Lost my job like hundreds of thousands or millions of people at that time. And I took the first job that came along my way that was as a customer support engineer.
All right.
They were willing to sponsor my visa, and it was Borderland Software. Unfortunately, we don't hear about Borderland anymore, a huge company at that time, uh, very popular from the development
Yeah,
side of things. But I got a customer support role in their Visibroker enterprise software division. And that is where it truly opened my eyes towards software development and quality. The kind of processes, practices you set up as customer success or customer support,
yeah.
where you do not unfortunately prioritize your customer as number one priority, regardless come what may. That was appalling. And nothing against Borderland software, it's just the way the industry was set at that
Right.
time, right? But that really opened my eyes to say, no, that's not how I want to be involved in the industry. And that is what changed my mindset towards quality,
Mm.
about how can I be contributing towards making a better quality product before it ships out in front of the customer,
Yeah.
so that they don't have to go through those types of issues. Of course, I have to do my part. I can't change the ocean. I can't drain the ocean on my own, but at least I have to do my part. And over these couple of decades now, I've played various different roles in trying to contribute towards building a better quality product. That has been my journey, and played any role that you can potentially think of. I've played in this time product and services organizations, as an employee, as a consultant, as an open source contributor, or part of a product team. Doesn't really matter. It's all about quality, and it's
Mm.
not testing, it is quality, right? It's end to end,
Yeah.
right from requirements to getting the feedback from your customers, if it is working well or not, everything that comes in between. So that has been my journey. I'm still a student of life. That's one of the things that I mentioned in my bio on LinkedIn. There's so much more to learn. I had
Yeah.
such amazing conversation with James when we met in Thailand of all places, and we discussed software testing and quality at that point in Thailand of all places, but it was fun.
I enjoyed it. And Andy, I think you've missed off one thing there, which we discussed in Thailand, was you
Is that
referred to
supposed to call
yourself.
the podcast?
Yeah, go careful what you're saying there.
No, no, we're not going down that route. But Anand, you referred to yourself as a quality bartender, right? And I thought that was very
Yes.
interesting. Maybe you just want to explain that for the
Oh,
audience.
that's a fun story. So, bartending and me go way back in time for that matter. About 15 years, getting close to 15 years ago, when I was working with ThoughtWorks, I started a testing conference, started with an internal thing or a local community thing. It scaled up, and I think it still happens in ThoughtWorks, called Vodka. But it is vodka with a Q, not a K. VODQA. Okay. And that's how my association with drinks probably started more than anything else. But getting back to the original question about a bartender, right? As a bartender, what you do is based on the order or what the customer wants, you're going to mix the right ingredients to make the drink of choice. It could be alcoholic, non-alcoholic. I could have chosen to call myself a chef as well, but
Yeah.
I think bartender is a little bit more catchy. But that's what I do from a quality perspective as well, depending on the context. What is the challenge on hand? What is the objective that the product, the customer, the organization is looking to achieve?
Hmm.
How can I bring in my experiences of what has worked, what has not worked, my exposure to different tools, technologies in the field? How can I bring the right set of ingredients to achieve to overcome the problem at hand and achieve the objective? And that's why I call myself a quality bartender. Yes, I could be a quality bartender behind a bar as well, but from a quality perspective as well, or a testing perspective as well, that does fit very well in what I do.
Awesome, awesome. Uh, you mentioned there that you kind of met James in Thailand. You've also been on a bit of a tour. There was a LinkedIn post quite recently talking
Yes.
about a kind of a, I'll call it a speaking tour. You can correct that if it's tell us a bit about kind of where you've been, kind of who you've been talking to, and what you've been talking about.
Yeah, so no, it's been interesting. So the original objective for to go on this recent tour was to speak at Testing Talks conference in Melbourne. Sorry, in Sydney. This was in Sydney. And since I was going all the way, I was representing Applitools in that event. It made sense that since I'm going all the way, let's try and meet with more community members, share experiences, learn from them, and hopefully get some more leads opportunities as well out of that, right? For
Yeah,
Applitools,
Hmm.
which is a good thing to achieve as a side result.
yeah,
And as part of that, we ended up speaking at multiple meetups. One was in New Zealand, Auckland, at Gentrack. That was a great meetup. A lot of, not a huge crowd, but about 40, 50 people, very interactive, a lot of challenging questions over there. And really, these are the kind of things that really drive me, right? When you get
mm,
asked questions out of the box in a different context altogether, how do you relate to that context and how do you try and answer in a way that will help the team think about a potential solution? I'm very conscious about not giving solutions because a
yeah,
solution is not going to work just by having a conversation. You have to go deeper in that to find out what's the right solution. But how do you share ideas and make sure it is taken as an idea so that they can ideate over it, they can iterate over it to find their own solution out of it? So the meetup in Auckland was amazing over there. And some of the conversations with the internal team as well took me back in time because we're speaking about agile and testing. Some of these aspects, some organizations are not as advanced in terms of their way of working for various different reasons, right? Maybe a legacy tech stack is a huge
yeah,
limiter how to really make progress on new tools, technologies, ways of working. So bringing some of those experiences of agile, shift left, collaborative way of working, distributed way of working, uh, and sometimes a simple technique like a mind map becomes very valuable as well. So a great set of conversations over there. Then went to Melbourne, had a meetup over there at the Stag community group where spoke about different aspects of shift left again and getting value from AI in the test automation space. That became a very interesting talk as well. And then, of course, it was testing talks at Sydney, where the topic was completely opposite of what I've been doing for the past 20 plus years. The topic was about how do you stop automation?
Oh,
And you
Wow.
need to stop
Okay.
automation because it's not adding value to you.
Hmm.
it's interesting too.
Yeah.
I think
And
you
I was
have to
actually
have
shared,
extreme views.
yeah,
Some
and
people
I
have
was
such
actually
extreme
scared
view
in
of
that.
all. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was saying I was scared in that talk because in the first
Uh-huh.
half of the talk, I was getting proven wrong. Everyone was saying, more than half the room was saying, no, automation is very valuable. We are getting maximum value out of it. How can you say there's no value in automation? But then came that pivot moment in that 30 seconds when it all turned around. And I proved it to them that no, your automation is useless if you're doing certain set of things.
Yeah.
And these are the anti-patterns that we closely get associated with in working, right? As a common way of working, it becomes like a thing that you would do as a capability that you really showcase. Oh, I'm going to rerun my failing test. I have a passing percentage in my builds to make the
Yeah,
build pass. If you're doing that, there's no way that you are getting value from automation. It's a
yeah,
very simple, straightforward thing. And that's where it really turned. And then the rest of the conversations was just amazing. I was elated at the end of the talk, where I was able to emphasize on the concept of a hard gate and how teams really need to start putting efforts to making their automated tests as a hard gate.
yeah,
So it was a
yeah.
lot of fun.
What do you mean
Hectic
by
two
that?
weeks.
A hard gate? I don't think I've heard that
Yeah.
before.
So hard gate is basically it's like developers would have unit tests, and if a test fails, the build fails, right?
Okay.
If your functional test automation, it could be UI, it could be API. If any
Hmm.
test fails, the build should fail and you cannot proceed ahead from there.
Right. I see. I see.
But the challenges of complex products, complex software, complex environments mean that you are never going to be able to have 100% passing tests.
Hmm. Hmm.
Some tests might be failing for valid reasons. I have a defect reported, but it is a low priority defect. It's not going to get fixed immediately. Or it's a complex
Yeah.
issue to fix. We are not going to be able to fix that immediately. But
Yeah.
my build is red and I'm still going to go ahead and deploy to production.
Hmm.
That does
Hmm.
not make sense to me.
Mm.
So the hard gate is essentially a technique to segregate your passing tests and your failing tests as two separate parts of the same pipeline, where the passing tests are always supposed to pass and the failing tests are always supposed to fail. And only if both these conditions are met, then your build is passed.
That's interesting.
That
That's
way, you
very
get a
interesting.
control of saying out of 100 tests, if five tests are failing, the five failing tests are as a separate stage of that pipeline. And if all those five continue to fail, then that stage is passed for me. That way, I am in control of which tests are failing and they are expected to fail or not.
Is that failing unexpectedly and therefore not important, or you expected them to fail and that's the right outcome?
Failing is failing, whether expectedly or not, it doesn't matter. That is where we get into the area of flaky test,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And flaky test, the way you overcome, unfortunately, is you keep rerunning and hope that it passes at some point and you move ahead from there. You close your eyes and move ahead.
yeah,
And I don't believe in that approach of handling the flaky test at all. You need to be in control of your destiny. If a test has failed, it is for a reason. It
yeah,
might
yeah.
be a test environment, but that environment is flaky. You cannot trust your test over there.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Fix the
Yeah.
environment problem. And that fix could be if it is this environment, I'm going to have a delay of maybe 5 seconds instead of just running through in 1 second, right?
Yeah,
You tweak your test based on the context of the environment, but you fix that problem so that you don't encounter issues at any random place at any point in time of your execution. And that way you get reliability in your test results. So then your test is going to fail only if there's a product issue or if your test is out of sync with your application. It is behind the product functionality. Valid reasons, right? You know it's a failing test, keep it as a separate pipeline, fix the problem, move it to the passing build, and they all should continue working as expected.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I like what you're talking about, Anand, in terms of the value of automation. Like like me, you must see it on LinkedIn a lot, and I've had conversations like this as well, where people love talking about the amount of automated tests they have. And some of the numbers are just ridiculous, and I
Yeah.
don't think they're true, but it's fine. But like some people will come out and they'll be like, "Oh, I have 30,000 automated tests running in my pipeline, blah blah blah," and it's like there's so many vanity metrics out there, right, associated with automation that actually give no indication of quality at all. Having 30,000 automated tests, what does that actually mean? Like, what value does that provide? How are you providing confidence? How are you de-risking the release? Like, there's too many vanity metrics out there, I think, right? It makes us
Yeah.
look great, makes it look like you're doing a fantastic job, you're at the bleeding edge, but actually, sometimes you don't need automation. That's absolutely fine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, and the challenge, James, in that approach, right, whether it's 30,000
Hmm.
or 300 or 100,
Yeah, yeah.
there is a certain percentage of that, those tests that is always failing.
Hmm.
But
Absolutely.
unfortunately, you don't know if in run number 10 you had 10 failures and run number 11 you had 10 failures. Are the same tests failing between these builds? You have no control over that. You don't know what that is unless you do a manual inspection, unless you have tool sets in place to really do a diff between these two test results to say which are the new tests that have failed, which are the common tests that are failing, and so on, right? And that's where, again, having control of your destiny is very important. I agree, tests are going to fail for some reason or the other, but you need to be in control of that. You need to be able to take decisions on those. And the reason we do automation is to reduce manual testing. If you can't trust your automation, you're putting more uh, effort, more responsibility on the manual testers. They are having to do much more than what they
Yeah,
had on the plate anyway.
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah. I want to ask a question around is that like 30,000? What does it mean? Don't know, right? But is that large number of test cases that are either automated or not automated? Is that a clue that actually there isn't control within what is actually being whether they're being executed manually or through automation almost is irrelevant, right? But there is lots of indicators around test teams not actually having control of what they are
Hmm.
testing, the understanding of the system, how to create isolation, time and time again. I'm interested. You had that session where the argument around test automation is not useful, and I kind of see where that was coming from now. And a lot of people on the other side are kind of in the camp of automation is the strategy for testing, right? Incorrectly. What do you see in terms of the biggest challenges of how test teams operate today to actually getting in control of actually their destiny going forward?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And the answer is simple. It depends. It depends on the context, right?
Yeah,
Because if it's a large enterprise, you typically have the employees distributed around the world.
yeah,
They're spread around the world, plus remote working, hybrid working creates a different challenge. Typically, in large organizations, you also have vendors and partner consultants who are coming
yeah,
and working with you.
yeah,
So, and each of them have a different agenda of sorts. You are a part of a
mm,
particular product, particular team, you've got particular focus areas. So it's very challenging to really say, this is what we want to do holistically from a quality perspective, from a strategy perspective.
yeah,
This aspect is much easier in smaller organizations and startups where there's more control, more collaboration. You almost know everyone on the team.
mm,
You are in more control of saying, how do we build a holistic strategy? How do we build testability into the product so that we don't have to have these kind of 30,000 or 3,000 tests, but
Yeah,
just have 5 end-to-end UI tests and the rest is going to be lower layers of the pyramid. And you
yeah,
still get that quality feedback at a very good pace and reliability and determinism as well. But
yeah,
in large organizations, that becomes a big challenge when you have teams across geographies, different time zones. How do you manage the deployments? Microservices architecture, not a very big fan of it. Let me be very honest, because we don't understand how to create those services and we end up creating microservice hell. How do we manage those services, the dependencies between services, the
yeah,
deployment of services when testing is going on?
yeah,
Get random failures around that because some service is randomly getting deployed or it's out of sync. It's a new version which is not updated on the consumer side, for example, right? So many moving pieces creates a lot of complexity in the end-to-end or the integration testing side of it. Works great for
it's
isolated testing.
unnecessary complexity as well, right? Just just
Yes.
just like I completely agree with you. I actually think monoliths a 100% the correct answer most of the time. But what's happened is you've seen developers go out, they've seen a LinkedIn post, they've read an article on microservices, they've seen Netflix do however many it is, 1,000 microservices, I think Netflix have or something. And it's like, oh, we should be doing that too, 100%. The monolith shouldn't exist. And then you just see, to your point, Anand, it just becomes so complex so quick
Yeah.
and it's unnecessary. You've just doubled the amount of work you have to do every deployment. The amount of defects that come in because one microservice has gone down or the contract between the microservices is broken. Like, I've seen so many headaches in organizations who have gone with
Yeah.
microservice architecture wrongly. It's absolutely crazy. It's absurd.
Is it the technology though, or is it the way that it's designed, implemented, and tested? Let's face it.
It's as simple, right? If you have a sand statue in your hand, some sand object, it's easy to hold that. But if it is not compressed as an object, it is loose sand, how much can you hold in your hand? It's going to fall through. A monolith is that one complex software which has defined boundaries. Of course, it is difficult to build, to make changes, it is challenging. And if you end up making the wrong change, it's going to crumple as well, right? It is going to fall apart. But once it is there, it is easy to manage that. But if you've got loose sand, like the microservices, so many moving pieces, there's much more work to be done in that case.
Yeah.
So how do you
Yeah.
really manage that?
Yeah.
That is where the challenges lie. I think Martin Fowler spoke about this, if I recall correctly. It might be there in his blogs and books, of course. Is a good way to break up monoliths into microservices is rather to James, what you said, right? Better to have a monolith, and once it starts becoming unmanageable,
Yeah. Then
you
separate.
start breaking it up
Yeah.
into logical components
Yep.
which become easier to manage.
Definitely.
Unfortunately, teams start taking each and every API and creating a separate service out of it. And they just create a service hell of sorts, which becomes very challenging to manage. Then you've got service contracts to take care of, backward compatibility to take care of. So many other complexities keep arising out of that.
Yeah. Reverse Conway's law, that and a strangler pattern essentially is coming from financial services. That is a scenario that you'll find yourself in a lot of, right? You've got an integrated monolith where there's lots of things that people don't really understand, and the way to get to understand them is actually to essentially whiteboard or model out, if you like, people's understanding of how certain systems work, or reverse engineer from production logs or things like that to get an understanding, create that isolation, right? Make things more simple. There's a nice segue into shift left testing, I think, that I've just created for ourselves there in terms
Before
of.
you shift left, there's one thing from your earlier question that you asked, right? How do testers really manage this kind of thing? 30,000 tests, is there really value or not? I think the same problem goes for developers as well, working on
Absolutely.
complex systems, right? The reason the complexity is not reduced is because there's no safety net of sorts to know if I make change to this complex soft logic, what's going to happen as a result.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you don't want to break things which are working well. Likewise, for the testers, there are 30,000 tests. The same tester has not been part of writing the first test all the way till the 30,000 test was implemented, right? But it is running. I don't want to touch it. I don't want to delete it.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what it might not be covering as part of the other functionality that has been validated. So it's a risk aspect. It's worry that what will happen if I remove this. And of course, vanity metrics. Again, James, you referred to that, right? The number of tests, automated tests, how can it ever go down? The only way to show value is by increasing those numbers, not by reducing those numbers. Again, a myth. It's an anti-pattern of sorts, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's funny.
So going on to shifting left then, we kind of talked about some of the challenges around almost in monoliths and things like that, and needing to break things up if they're getting unwieldy in the same way. Overly complex microservices architecture creates arguably a monolith of problems for tackling those things. You mentioned that you kind of had a lot of conversations about shifting left, and again, you see a lot in the LinkedIn verse, if that's a word, around people saying this is how it should be done, people paying lip service to it. What do you see in the way of organizations adopting shift left, good and bad?
Interesting. Again, it depends on who you are speaking with,
Yeah,
what type of organization, how mature that organization is. Not in terms of the product, they might be doing fantastic in terms of the product offering in the market. But from a technology perspective, an internal way of working perspective, a lot depends on that. And unfortunately, what I see a lot of, and that's why probably people or companies get me involved with them as well, right? Because they are having problems. So you get to see more of the problems and the good success stories as well.
yeah,
So the fine print or the star, uh, what's the right way to say this? Keeping that caveat in mind, that I get to see a lot of unsuccessful implementations or
yeah,
challenges in implementations. A lot of the reasons for that is because one of the aspect is they were a traditional organization,
mm,
waterfall way of working, command and control way of working,
Hmm.
but suddenly now you've gone the agile way. Other than going the agile way in terms of a checklist approach, there's
yeah,
nothing else that has changed on the ground. Why do you want to do the agile way of working? To get early feedback, to do iterative development, get that early feedback, and focus on the value proposition, right? To the customer, to the business. Are we doing the right thing?
Hmm.
But it also means I'm going to slice my requirements in small, thin
yeah,
vertical slices to see the value proposition.
yeah,
A good philosophy, a good thought process in that sense. Likewise, microservices also is a great thought process. The way
mm,
you approach it, the way you get to implement it, that's where the challenge comes across. Now, you cannot just change the roles, titles, and say, I'm going to do a scrum meeting, I'm going to do a retrospective, I'm going to do a planning meeting, and then everything else remains the same on the ground.
yeah,
That does not work. That is where a lot of challenges come in. The legacy systems, how do you integrate new technologies, new way of working in that? That becomes a problem. So I might have a sprint way of working, but can I really do in sprint automation? Can I do a release at the end of the sprint? And can that be done for me independently, or do I need to bundle with other teams to really take it out as a release? It's different complexities in various different plans. So shifting left, yes, people are trying to do that. Fortunately, I don't hear the word agile much anymore, which is a
you
great thing.
don't.
No, I don't, which is a good thing. And in fact, if I hear the word agile, my eyes get raised because I think, okay, what are you really talking about yet, right? Because the whole thing about agile is you believe in the concept about early feedback. And what are you going to do to get that early feedback?
Mm,
It puts a lot of stress on testing, which not people really think about because developers will do the bits, thin
yeah,
slices implemented quickly. But from a testing perspective, you have to test that thin slice and make sure that continues to work in the grand context of things that have already been released.
yeah,
So one of the things that I spoke about in this tour of mine is in the shift left concept. We don't realize that the testers actually live three lives at every single point in time. They have to support the past sprint,
Hmm.
which has not yet completed fully, right? They have to continue supporting that. They have to work on testing what is there in the current sprint, and they have to be aware of what's coming up next because they need to contribute towards grooming that backlog for the next upcoming sprint. And this is happening sprint over sprint every single time. Developers are focusing on their user stories. It might be part of a feature cut across various different sprints, but that is their scope. But testers are thinking about the whole product, the whole domain, and thinking about supporting what is remaining from the past sprint, testing the current and the future as well. It's a lot of stress on the testers who's there. And testing as a role, not necessarily the tester, right? It could be developers
yeah,
who are doing that aspect as well, which is great. It's the activity that I'm really focused on more than the role itself. And that testing activity is very stressful in the agile way of working, but not many
Yeah,
people speak about it.
absolutely. No, I agree with you, Anand. I've been saying this a lot recently that I'm surprised actually in the testing community or pretty much anyone in software delivery, we don't see more burnout. Because if you look at every organization right now, everyone's trying to deliver more. They're trying to deliver faster, and ultimately that puts a squeeze predominantly on the testers, right, who are there. There's always less time to test. There's more features to go out and test. Everything that's happening with AI at the moment, there's even more code being produced. That code is untrustworthy. That puts an even heavier dependency on having good quality gates and being able to verify that everything works correctly and meets the requirements. We haven't broken loads of stuff, right? And I
Yeah.
just think if you're a tester, actually, it's a really hard job. It's not easy, right? And one thing I am excited about, if you coming back to the original question, what's changed? What are we seeing in organizations? One of the things I'm seeing is there's a deeper appreciation now of quality in organizations.
Yeah.
And you see that with the adoption of, quality engineers, right? We're not just treating testing as something that happens at the end. Let's go through, run some test cases, check the boxes. Yeah, we're good to release. To your point, Anand, it's coming at it, it's looking at it, it's applying the skills of testers, which ultimately is kind of critical thinking, right? Being
Yeah.
able to pick things apart, being able to go in and look at things critically and, ask the right questions, right? Is this what we should be building? Is this going to work in the correct way? What are the gaps that we're missing? And being able to look at this more holistically, right? And then introducing that across the whole software delivery lifecycle rather than just at the end, right? Which ultimately is what shift left is. But I think there's a deeper appreciation now of testers and quality in general. And I think if I went back to when I first got involved in this space, I don't think that appreciation existed as much as it does right now,
True. True.
So,
I agree with you completely. The appreciation is there. Unfortunately, the solution is not yet there.
yeah, also true. Yeah,
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 that
yeah,
awareness is
yeah,
definitely there.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
getting better,
Mm,
but the solution to this challenge is not yet there. And
hmm
if you really think about it, it's not that difficult. If you really get down to trying to make this work for you, it's not really that challenging. What you really need is good understanding of prioritization. You don't need 30,000 tests. Can I do with 30?
yeah.
Yeah.
How can I really do that, right? What is the risk of not doing those 29,970? Oh, that was really good math. But
Yeah.
it's the aspect of risk, understanding risk, doing the right prioritization, and at the same time,
Mm,
thinking about tech debt from a testing perspective is
Yeah.
very much required, which is missing. Developers can put their foot down and say that if I don't address this tech debt, you are not going to get this new feature. It's not possible to do that. And everything will come to a stop. They'll get their time to work on that tech debt. Testers don't get that. And again, testers as an activity I'm talking about, right? And that activity could be I just want to clean up my old test cases. I don't need a 50,000 test cases in my test case management system right from day zero of
Absolutely.
my product.
Yeah.
I
yeah.
just want to keep what is relevant. I need time to clean that up. The automated test, can I get 30,000 down to 29,000? I need time to clean that up,
Yeah.
right? That time is never really possible, unfortunately, in most places that we see.
That
Yeah.
that's a point that we hear a lot, and this is where everybody's interested in automation, and actually you're talking about how do you become quicker? You improve your flow, right? And therefore, to your 30,000 tests, half of them are going to be redundant, duplicated tests, and so the most effective and efficient way that you can get better is to, like you say, do that refactoring exercise and get rid of half the effort that you're putting in historically, right?
Exactly.
It's a hard conversation to have, right? It's almost
Yeah.
like you have to have an intervention point. If an organization is stuck in a rut, I would say, where it is, they're focusing on vanity metrics, we're constantly firefighting, it's really hard to have that moment where you actually come up for air and you ask the kind of questions you're talking about, Anand, right? What is
Yeah.
the value of what we're doing? Why are we actually doing this? Do we need to be doing this? And I think often, that doesn't come from the organization itself because everyone's so stuck in the same way of working. They're just focused on what's in front of them, not where they could be in 3 to 6 months' time. And I think that's really where you have to bring in someone with a strong voice,
Yeah.
someone with deep experience who can come in. And that's why I enjoy talking to you, Anand, because I see you as that person who can come into organizations and really help from that perspective because you ask the right questions, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think that can come internally sometimes unless you bring in a really strong VP of engineering, a really strong person who has that mindset that they can help to transform an organization.
Yeah,
Otherwise, you have to look externally, right, and bring in the
yeah,
right people, I
yeah.
think.
But
Yeah.
what you said, I think, is again very, very true, right, James? You need to have a strong voice, and it doesn't need to be as a VP or someone very senior. But unfortunately, what happens is, and I've seen this again many times, people on the team and sometimes relatively junior people who have not seen the world as much or seen different stories as much, but they ask the right questions, but they're not able to raise their voice enough to say we need to make a difference here. Sometimes the same thing repeated from an external person
Yeah.
relates to more than someone on your own team or within the organization saying the same thing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's
And it's
interesting. Yeah.
unfortunate, but that is the
That's
reality.
the way it
Sometimes you
is.
need
Yeah.
external validation as well to make that happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes when we go into an organization, and Rich, you've probably got quite a few thoughts on this. I almost see it like we're having a therapy session sometimes because they know the problems they have, they know the solutions as well. And me and Rich will be on call sometimes, and we'll just be asking questions that they know the answers to, and they answer them, and they really didn't need the call with us, right? And it's
No.
Mm.
it's it's quite amusing, isn't it? I
I
think.
think just yeah, like you say, Anand, it's just an external voice that seems to resonate more, right? This is where on the other side of the world where I was actually in delivery roles, it was the same. I was very senior in certain organisation, and so we would have auditors come in every now and again, and basically we would go in and brief them in terms of what to say back to our organization, right? And that was their role. It almost, you have your voice seems to be stronger within our organization than our. Unfortunately, that's the way it is, like you say, right? And
Crazy.
so, can you do this, and this for us in order to get the traction that we've basically been, if I add hair, pulling my hair out for the last, 6 to 12 months, but we just can't get that traction.
Yeah, true.
Mm.
Um, cool. Um,
Yeah.
you mentioned, and health warning, I think, is the thing where you see it done. You see things like shift left, or the overemphasis on automating the wrong thing quite a lot. What are some of the kind of the kind of the key anti patterns that you start to see very early on, either in the ways of working or what people say?
Well, then, quite a few in that sense, right? So you've got a test case management tool, which itself is anti-pattern in my opinion,
Yeah.
right? I don't think there should be a test case management system,
No.
even for large complex products. If you have the right mindset in place, the right approach in place, you should find a way to automate what is important and then throw away everything else. Just keep what is not automatable as a backlog. That's the only place why you would need a test case management system of sorts. But that is one anti-pattern. The second is about you have your tests automated. Out of 50,000 test cases in test case management system, you have 25,000 automated. Why are you not deleting off the 25,000 from your test case management system?
Yeah.
In fact, what you want to do is the tests which run, you want to update the results of those tests in your test case management system. What is the status of those tests? Classic anti-pattern. You
Yeah.
don't need that. You
Yeah.
don't need that anymore. Because you have to trust in your code. Again, it comes back to trusting your automation, right? Is it going to be
Hmm.
reliable? And if it is reliable, then you don't need that. Get it out of the system. That's another anti-pattern that I see. From an automation perspective itself, not having reliability, we very easily say it's flaky tests. That's why we want to rerun. Or we've got a huge number of tests. Not
Yeah.
everything can be passing. We're going to have a passing percentage over there. Regardless of what happens, we are going to do the release anyway.
Yeah.
Another classic anti-pattern, right? You're not trusting, you're not valuing what you're doing as much.
Yeah.
So these are some of the things that typically come across very easily and very commonly.
Cool. Awesome. Um, let's shift to James's favorite subject of AI. So I'm sure you're starting to have a lot of conversations around AI, the role of AI within testing. What kind of things are you hearing? What kind of things are people asking for? I guess is the first place to start. And then what practical uses of AI are you starting to see?
So when I have actually had a call with a couple of prospects where they want to see how they can remove the testing function and AI will take care of testing.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, anti-pattern in that sense. It's
Yeah.
wishing for too much.
I've seen the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My answer is the day you can have AI build your software product, that day you'll be able to test it using AI as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you need developers, you need testers. You need, again, the activity is what I'm talking about, not the role.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But AI definitely can help. It helps tremendously. It's not there as a solution, but it's there as a good set of utilities or arms in your armory of sorts, right? You've got a good set of tools in your toolkit, how you can get more efficient. Before AI, my approach to get more value is how can I do the amount of work that I do in 40 hours? How can I finish that in 35 hours? I have to bring my creativity, my innovative abilities in place to get better at that. Initially, I'll spend 45 hours to try to come down to 35 because I need to do some additional work to get to that stage. But then I get those 5 hours additional to do other activities. Likewise, with AI, you don't have to do everything manually anymore, whether it's writing test plans, test cases, or automating tests. Likewise, for developer side as well, it's going to be similar type of thought process. Now, these are not solutions that are ready, but it's a great stepping stone. You don't have to reinvent the wheel from scratch and get there. I was speaking at a conference yesterday, and one of the comments made was AI is not yet there. It's not able to generate certain set of prompts easily. It's a very simple, trivial use cases, not even related to software for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
My thought over there is, yeah, fine, but at least it's giving you a starting point. Now you
Absolutely.
apply your mind and how do you get better at that,
Yeah.
right? You're looking at this as a solution, as an end result. I'm looking at it as a stepping stone. How can I get my work done faster? Now, if I'm going to take it blindly, I'm stupid in that case.
Yeah, I've seen a similar thing as well, and I think I think even beyond AI, it's the same of any technology, any
Exactly.
tooling, right? As soon as you start to, because on everything, right, you have tooling, you have process, you have people. As soon as you start looking at tooling like it's the solution, and we're going to adopt this tool, and then we're going to fit the process around it, that is completely the wrong way to go, right? You should,
Yep.
if you have success at the moment, fine, you should be going through looking at the process which is working, and it's almost going through and it's saying, how can I optimize this process? How can I make it faster, to your point, and then how can I go from 40 hours to 35? Where's the bottleneck at the moment, or what's the limiting thing that I can really amplify? Is there technology that can help me go through that, right? So, you look back at automation. Okay, actually, I have a really good testing process. The execution is slowing me down at the moment because we're trying to release more. It makes sense for me to introduce automation so that I can now speed up the test execution. Fine. I'm looking at my process at the moment. It takes me forever to create manual test definitions. Maybe I can plug AI into there and get me from essentially a blank document up to having something which has some steps in there and it has some lists, etc. It's not perfect, but it gives me a great starting point that I
Exactly.
cut out a couple of hours that I just fill in the gaps, enter some more stuff, verify, whatever, right? And I think as soon as you start to weigh too heavily on tooling technology and you start to look at it that it's a magic button, you go in the wrong direction. That's completely wrong,
Absolutely.
right? To your point, it's process optimization. Get a good process and keep refining it, keep optimizing it. Unless like some revolution happens, to your point, that we have AI agents come out and start coding and testing for us. But I think that's just wishful thinking, right? So we
Absolutely.
have to focus on optimization, I think.
Yeah. That's where again the
Yeah.
bartender analogy comes in, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have to see
I
what's
love that, by the
best.
way.
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic. It really stuck in my mind when you said
Yeah.
it.
Then exactly to what you said again, just some more
Hmm.
examples of that, right? As
Yeah.
you buy a car, no car is perfect. Yes, it's built great quality, it does
Hmm.
well, but it does break down. The
Yeah.
check engine light still comes on. Does it mean you're not going to buy a car and you're going to continue walking around? You'll never get to your destination in time. So what's the risk of certain thing happening or not, and how do you mitigate that? And how do you optimize for that? The check engine light is a warning. You go get it checked over there, right?
Yeah.
You're never going to have a situation where that light is never going to come up. So it's, yeah, I was confused now after hearing that yesterday. Should I be laughing? Should I be frustrated? Should I be angry? Because it just did not make sense the way we are looking at AI. And AI is a buzzword now, but the technology, AI, ML, has been around for a long time. Companies
Yeah.
have been working on these without calling it AI, ML for a long time. And then it got mainstream, it got more reusable as such. But companies did have that information. They were processing that data in some way or the other and taking decisions based on that since a long time. Likewise, for continuous integration, before CI became popular, companies were running, building automated tests. They were running the tests in some form of scheduler or not.
Yeah.
CI became a mainstream terminology of how to approach that activity.
Awesome.
We're
All right.
getting into different rant stage. We need to change the question rich quick.
I guess I'm interested in the streamlining of end-to-end test automation, and we might have touched on this in terms of um, kind of the endless cycle of automation to a certain extent, in terms of lots of organizations potentially have an over-reliance on big testing, big flaky testing, maybe. So what are your thoughts around the adoption of automation, end-to-end automation? How do organizations go around streamlining it,
Yeah.
or aren't they?
Yeah. So this is actually a completely different topic than what we discussed earlier. Streamlining and automation, in my mind, means a completely non-intrusive way of getting feedback of quality about your product. When any code change happens, developers push their code to a version control system. Automatically, the tests need to run, the build unit test would run,
Yeah.
component tests would run, API tests would run, sonar checks would run. Everything passes, automatically a build is generated. Once that build is generated, if it is successful, then it is deployed in the next environment. As soon as the deployment happens, the next set of tests run automatically.
Yep.
It's all about streamlining that, removing the
Okay.
manual intervention required to do any of these things.
Okay.
Okay. But now when you talk more focused on the end-to-end automation side, the UI automation side, it's much more challenging, because when you're running this as part of your CI infrastructure, if it is a web application, in your CI infrastructure, how do you get the browsers available to make sure your test can run automatically? How do you have your test data provisioned to make the test run seamlessly over there? If it's mobile automation, it's even more challenging, because now the artifact that is produced, it's not deployed in an environment, but it's available as an APK or an app file or IPA file or a zip file, depending how the artifact is. You need to pick it up from a different repository. You need to pull it, find a device, whether it's in your infrastructure or a device farm, push that artifact over there, then your test should start running automatically. There's a
Yeah.
lot of moving pieces over here
Yeah.
that you need to manage. And unfortunately, teams do not set this up in a correct way to make it truly in a non-intrusive, non-manual intervention way of working.
Mm-hmm.
In Azure, there's a concept of build pipelines, release pipelines. So how can you streamline that, make it version controlled, your configurations version controlled? You have the right kind of shell scripting in place, for example, as
Yeah.
one way to address it, right? How you fetch the artifact, push it to some other place in the device, and so on. There are ways how you can manage these things, but we don't think enough about building those pieces of infrastructure, taking that extra effort one time, and to get it set up so that manual intervention is not required.
I
So
agree
that
with
is more
that.
about the streamlining side that I
Yeah.
speak
Yeah.
about. I've done a lot of work in that area in the past couple of years. Different solutions, but approaching again the same objective.
Mm-hmm.
Why
In
do you
my
think? Why?
head,
Go on.
oh, this might answer the question you're going to ask, Rich. in 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 my head, automation is so much harder than it should be. Like automation should be something that's easy, and the reason it's hard is to your point there, right? The infrastructure stuff. If you have so many microservices, you have the wrong infrastructure, you have the wrong architecture, the complexity of automating a process becomes so much harder, right? But often, even simple things like I talk to automation engineers, and when I talk to them and I ask them, what's the hardest bit of your job? Where are you spending the most time? A lot of the time, they're spending time with flaky tests. They're spending time trying to pick out identifiers to go and extract an object. And it's such a waste of time. The underlying thing there is testability, which you mentioned earlier, and was not thought about from the engineering team. It wasn't thought about when we wrote the software requirements initially. How are we going to test this? How can we automate the testing in this thing? So you see some of the good organizations now, they build really rigorous identifiers like with the test ID, whatever, into their HTML DOM as they're building it, right? And it's if you don't think about testability and testability is an afterthought, automation becomes 10 degrees harder than it should be, right?
Yeah,
And that's a real shame because automation should be fun, it should be easy, and it shouldn't be anywhere near the pain that exists in the industry at the moment,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
But locators is just one of those challenges.
No, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Test data
Yeah.
is, in my opinion,
Yeah.
a bigger challenge
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
in complex systems to create test data is insanely difficult. I know about 15,
Yeah.
15ish years ago, I worked on a project where the test data actually came from a mainframe.
Mm-hmm.
They had one
Mm-hmm.
mainframe across all the non-prod environments where the test data was refreshed once in whatever duration that was there. And that was a source of truth. So there's no way for us to create test data on demand. We were restricted by that. Now, that's a complexity of the system.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
you're mixing legacy and new components, it is going to happen. But for new components, especially talking about locators, thinking about test data, how am I going to create test data? I need a service to be able to create test data. I need a service to be able to fetch
Mm-hmm.
OTP in my
Mm-hmm.
lower environments for 2FA. If you have that built in, so much complexity around testing of 2FA type of scenarios and all will be taken care of.
Yeah. I was going to say you've been lucky to not come across that scenario in the last 15 years. We come across it quite a lot.
Yeah,
Trying to source a
Yeah.
mainframe.
there are different
It's
challenges.
crazy how old some of the systems are, right? They are far older than us.
Yes, yes.
What I was going to say there, it's kind of touching on what James said, but one of the other challenges, and you touched on kind of agile teams almost have readopted a checklist way of working on top of what they were historically doing, right? And a lot of change tends to be very near term, not necessarily looking at the bigger picture. A lot of the way that they either inherited a way of working, i.e., the way that they promote things into different environments, or the teams to which provision the environments to them. For example, agile teams tend to be very functional development based. Do you think that the silos that I've kind of articulated there, to James's point around, the complexity of the systems isn't necessarily the be all and end all, but actually some of the organizational constructs, you know, it sounds simple, but that's one of the big reasons why you don't get this streamlined automated flow a lot of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you really think about it, we've got a pretty well-defined way of working if you think about the agile construct of working, right? You've got requirements, developers, testers, DevOps, all those cross roles, activities being done as a cross-functional team. But there are still definitely going to be handovers, even if it's two developers working on a piece of functionality. There's
Mm-hmm.
still some kind of handover and collaboration that happens, right? What you need to think about, which is in a way a no-brainer, what is the entry and exit criteria? And this is again coming from very old school of thought. What's the entry criteria, exit criteria for each activity? If you have that defined and agreed as a team, a lot of these challenges actually go away automatically. So the testability
Yeah.
requirements that comes as part of my requirements, I cannot have a requirement set to be ready for implementation if some of the inputs from testers is not incorporated as part of that.
Yeah.
right? So it's
Yeah.
a very simple thing if you really think about it, but it does put much more work and effort required to be done to make
Yeah,
that
yeah.
happen on a continuous basis.
Cool. Awesome. I'm very conscious of time, Anand. I'm just going to say a big thank you to yourself. Big thank you to James. I'm going to ask you one last question, and then I'll ask how people can get hold of you. So you've obviously been on a lot of speaking tours. What's the best advice? One piece of advice that you gave during those talks that you can impart to the listeners of this pod.
Don't listen to me.
No.
Rather, let me expand on that. Let me expand. So
Sounds
what?
like it rehearsed. That was a brilliant answer.
So no, but it's very close to what I've told people, right? After my first set of talks that I did, people started saying, "Oh, this is exactly what I need to do in my organization," and I
Yeah.
got scared over there. And that's when I started saying, "This is what worked for me. It is definitely not going to work
Yeah,
for you. You
yeah,
have to prove yourself that it is going to work for you or not."
yeah,
Right? So
absolutely.
don't
Yeah,
just take it blindly. No, what I'm saying, this is what worked for me in this context. The same thing will not work for me in another context.
yeah.
You have to make sure what you are adopting is going to really work for you.
That's
So
that's
that
a
will
that,
be my advice. Common thing that I've persisted
yeah,
with in all of my experience sharing
yeah,
activities I do.
absolutely. Take a lot of the themes, but you work in a certain context, right? And you don't know theirs.
Take
It's
the
the
idea
greatest
and
choice. Yeah,
see what
absolutely,
is well for you.
absolutely. So if people want to get hold of you, Van, what's the best way of finding you?
LinkedIn, Twitter, that's my only social media. I call LinkedIn also social media. Twitter, which has now become X, I still call it Twitter, but that's two ways, good, easy ways that you can find me and connect with me.
Awesome. So a big thank you again, Anand. Really good insights to your travels around the world and also your experiences in testing is amazing to us. So a
Yeah.
big
Thank
thank
you,
you. Thanks
Anand.
for coming on the pod. Thanks again, James, for co-hosting with me. If you like what you're hearing, please like and subscribe and listen out for the next pod. Um, Till next time, thank you again, Anand. Bye bye.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.